Hello everyone. I'd like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who have joined us today, either in person or watching via the live stream, to this meeting of the Cambridge Joint Area Committee at the Guildhall in Cambridge. Both councils allow filming and photography at their public meetings, so feel free to take pictures, tweet or blog during the meeting. But could I please request that members of the committee and the public turn their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. I will just go through and welcome the committee members, and if you could just introduce yourselves as we go around. If we can start on this side with Councillor Bagent.
Well, I've just been introduced. I'm Dave Bagent from Romsey, Labour.
Alex Bulat, County Councillor for the Abbey Division.
Karen Young from Queen Edith's.
Councillor Martin Smart, King's Hedges.
Councillor Alex Beckett from Queen Edith's.
Neil Shaler from Romsey Division and Vice Chair of Highways.
Councillor Naomi Bennett, Abbey Ward.
Councillor Jerry Bird, Chesterton Ward.
Elisa Moschini, King's Hedges.
Richard Robertson, City Councillor for Petersfield.
Philippa Slatter, County Councillor for Trumpington.
I'm Councillor Katie Thornborough for Petersfield. And when we have a lot of officers here, and as you come in, if you could introduce yourselves before you speak about the issues. Thank you. Would the Democratic Services Officer report any apologies for absence, please?
Thank you, Chair. There are apologies from Councillor Black, and Councillor Boulat is here as a substitute, and from Councillor Moore, and Councillor Smart is here as a substitute.
Thank you very much. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable punitionary interests or non-statutory disclosable interests? Councillor Bagent.
A member of Cambridge Cycling Campaign, Chair.
Thank you very much. If any members want to declare an interest at the start of any item, you're very welcome to do so. Okay, we'll move on to item 2, which is the last minutes of the 29th of July. We've been asked to approve the minutes of the last committee meeting held on the 29th of July as an accurate record. So can I ask whether members disagree with the accuracy of the minutes? Would anybody like to raise any points, please? Councillor Slatter.
Thank you, Chair. I was alerted by a paragraph on page 7, which is acknowledging the concerns of Havenfield residents. It crops up in other places as well. But in terms of the review process, which will be carried out for 6 months after implementation, I was keen that we would be able to collect information or log concerns as we go along. And this wording does suggest that it will start after 6 months and people will have to be alerted and contribute. And these may have been issues that have come and gone, but that could be repeated. Thank you.
Do we have any other comments? So, I also feel that the point raised by Councillor Slatter is accurate, but we resolve under the resolution to approve a review of on-street parking in the affected area 6 months after the residential parking scheme. So my understanding is that review is being considered by the County Council, and what I hope is the review will allow people to make comments during the 6 months period. Do you know?
I think an email address is going to be set up when the scheme goes live, and then people can feed directly into that.
Can you add that to the minutes? Thank you very much. Okay, so with that addition, can we have a quick show of hands for minutes of the last meeting? think that's by affirmation. Thank you very much. So do officers or members have any comments on the minutes action log? No? Okay, we can, let's move on to item number 3, which is public questions and petitions. We've received 2 public questions, which all relate to agenda item 4, the proposed waiting restrictions on Riverside, and they'll be heard at the start of that relevant item, which is next. So we'll go straight on to item 4. This first report is on the proposed waiting restrictions on Riverside, and it will be presented by the County Council's Traffic Manager, Sonia Hanson.
Thank you. Yes, as confirmed, I'm Sonia Hanson, Traffic Manager for Cambridgeshire County Council. The report sets out the details of a local highway initiative funded scheme for parking restrictions in Riverside in Cambridge, details the traffic regulation order process and consultation, and the details of the responses to the consultation. The scheme came about due to concerns about parking of large vehicles, which increases the potential for conflict between cyclists and vehicles. And the scheme aims to increase active travel through that route and improve safety. The committee is asked to consider the objections and comment prior to the delegated decision-making process.
Thank you very much. So I will now invite members of the public to present their questions to the committee. Could I remind you that each of you have 3 minutes to present your questions. This is a traffic light indicator. Will turn on to amber when there are 30 seconds remaining.
Sorry, Chair. Can I ask a question? Are these written questions or are they just reading out what they want to say now? Do we have advance warning of what they're saying?
Thank you, Chair. No, we don't publish them in advance because we don't require public speakers to submit the full question.
Okay, that's fine. It's just different from our experience in Cambridge, in the city.
So, first question is Miss Kate Kroonbrock. I hope I've pronounced that right. Perhaps you could, so this is when it starts it will be green, and then 30 seconds beforehand it will be amber, and then red after 3 minutes.
My name is Kate. I'm here on behalf of the residents at 96, 97 and 98 Riverside. I'm sorry if I misunderstood, but this isn't so much a question, but I'm just here on their behalf to support what has been suggested. And while we sort of see it as kind of on the extreme end, some of our neighbors have been searching for some kind of order and structure with the parking in this in our neighborhood for decades. And we would see something as an exceptional step towards making this area feel safer and secure. I don't know if what has been published, if everyone's aware, but we are dealing with on a regular basis overcrowding on the streets. We have people using the children's playground as a toilet because they don't have facilities within their own vans. We catch people at least once a week. And we've had incidences with residents of these vans shouting at us, attacking our cars, leaving what we believe to be the remnants of their compostable toilets in our green bins. And we've seen cyclists crash. We've had our bins not be able to be collected. So while I do appreciate that this is a larger concern for the area, we would really like to see something that secures the residents' safety, cyclists, pedestrians, motorists, and absolutely ensuring that the park is not being used as a dumping site. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your points. We have Mrs. Sharon Stanley. You can start when you're ready.
Okay, as I've said, I'm Sharon Stanley. I've lived on Riverside for over 30 years now, and I do agree with Kate that this has been an ongoing issue for many years. However, I'm representing the residents of 80, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, and 89 because they are not around to represent themselves at the moment, they're away. The concern and the question I really want asking is the proposals that have been put in place. They address it for that little small area next to Stourbridge Common, from Stanley Road to Stourbridge Common, but I can't see how it stops the same issues then being pushed onto the other side of the road in front of the residents further along Riverside. So from Stanley Road to St Bartholomew's Court, there is nothing stopping these large camper vehicles, caravans, and various vehicles that we have the issues with, from them just transferring from the Riverside side of the river onto our side with no other restrictions in place. We're still going to have the same issues, and the road itself is sort of 33 metres wide. It will push issues round onto Stanley Road, which is only 22 metres wide, and we know already that emergency vehicles have not been able to access Riverside through Stanley Road because of caravans and things that are parked there. When a neighbour set fire to his frying pan, that the fire engine couldn't get through because of a caravan parked there. So by putting WLO lines along the whole of Riverside and that end, that's not going to address some of those issues, and in fact it could make the surrounding areas more dangerous for pedestrians walking in the road. It doesn't stop the large vehicles. I have a proposal of what could help with some WLO lines, maybe to the bottom of Stanley Road on that initial area near Stourbridge Common. And then what we really need is some signage, either residents parking, but I know that's not funded, but in other cities there is signage around which doesn't necessarily have to be policed by officials, but we as residents sort of police the area anyway, which actually states not permitted public service vehicles, coaches, goods vehicles, taxis, caravans, caravanettes and camper vans, no vehicles to be used for sleeping or camping purposes. Now, some sort of signage along that area would stop a lot of these issues that we're having with these large vehicles, or also some bays that are just marked on the road so that people can't park face on to the river, which is what's obstructing a lot of the through flow of traffic, would equally help resolve this issue in a fairly cost-effective manner without having the detrimental effect of us with no parking for our houses, in front of our houses. And there's 8 houses, because Kate has got parking, but 8 houses on Riverside with no off-road parking. Where are we then meant to park our vehicles? And as I say, pushing the big, large vehicles in front of our houses instead of over to the river. I don't see that the solution that's been put forward, it needs tweaking.
Would you like to hand us your video?
Yeah.
So this committee doesn't make decisions. We look at what's in front of us and we listen and we will debate, and there is a recommendation for us to consider. So we have to look what's in front of us, but I'm sure the members here will have listened carefully, and we'll see how the debate goes. Thank you very much for coming forward. Do we have a Jim Hare? Is he here? Not coming. Okay. Committee. Before we open the debate to the committee, could I ask local members whether they would like to speak, starting with county councillors and then city councillors? The county councillor, Councillor Smart, do you want to make a point first before the ward members come in?
Yeah, so I know Sharon Stanley was a parent from school, so my discretion is unfettered.
We'll make a note of that. Okay. So now we'll start with the county councillor, Councillor Bullock.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the public questions and comments from residents, particularly suggestions around signage. I think all those suggestions we can take forward as members, especially ward members, and consider what we can do to improve in the future as well. And I also like to thank to the 210 residents across not only Riverside, but the wider area as well, who responded to the consultation. Now, this local highways improvement application has involved many tens of hours of work with residents directly affected, with people who wrote to us, councillors, to myself as county councillor, to the 3 city councillors as well for Abbey Ward, as well as many site visits with various county and city officers. And as the public comments noted, this has been a discussion for many, many years, long before I was even elected on the county council in 2021. And this was often a conversation part of the wider Riverside vision, which envisaged this prioritizing pedestrians, so pedestrians are able to walk alongside the river and having like a better flow of cycling, but also pedestrians and a safer Riverside in general. So we had several site visits. This proposal has been a result of many different negotiations and trying to get to a solution that hopefully has majority support. While I support the recommendation overall as the local county member, I want to use this time in committee to reflect on some of the resident views, including many representations I receive via email and in person as well, whilst on Riverside over the last several years. Most people I spoke to personally think that this should go ahead in some form, but that there should be some further discussion on the possible impact of the wider area as it has been presented in the public comments, especially around issues of possible displacement on Stanley Road, Oyster Row, and other surrounding streets, because unlike the western side of Riverside, the eastern side of Riverside doesn't have a residence parking scheme. I had specific representations from residents living in Waterview, for example, on Riverside, who are particularly concerned about displacement immediately outside their area. So if we're approving this today, that's something we should give consideration to in order to be able to effectively monitor any issue that arises from that and be able to act on it. I think overall residents would also value to know where the Greater Cambridge Partnership is at in regards to resident parking schemes more broadly. I remember in previous GCP meetings and papers, there was some consideration for the eastern side of Riverside to be consulted on for residents parking. I know they had many other priorities, not least the Eastern Access project, which will positively impact Abbey in general, but that's something that would be interesting to note and to have a follow-up on. Because it's very important to get residents involved to make sure that this scheme, if approved, works with whatever else it might be proposed by the GCP in the future. So on this issue around displaced parking, one of the questions I had as a local councillor is how will residents be able to track any issues that might arise and push for a resolution as quickly as possible. I know the officer response in Appendix 4 saying that this, if displacement does become an issue, additional measures can be sought for in a future scheme. I think going through this local highways improvement process, obviously applying for this once, being rejected for funding and finally being successful, it's a kind of a 3-year-long process of getting this to this committee today. So I think my question is around whether we need any modifications to this scheme based on local feedback, whether the process can be a little bit quicker than applying yet for another LHI potentially and going again through several years of meetings and consultations. There are also some concerns I received as local member around commercial vehicles using this parking, and some residents ask whether the city council needs to consider more broadly, I know they already do, but like look at the provision for parking for street vendors more generally, because this has happened in the area as well. So I want to leave you in conclusion with a couple of comments from 2 residents who couldn't make it in person today, but they would like their views to be represented by myself as local member on this committee. So one resident on Riverside who lives on Riverside says that I support the overall proposal, even though it impacts me negatively because there will be no parking near my house, but it seems that at least it is a solution for this on safety, if having vans causing bottlenecks and pollution to the river and playground is the situation right now. And a couple of residents who live at Waterview on Riverside say that we are delighted to support the proposed parking restrictions, but there is a foreseeable and quite probable ripple impact from simply limiting the restrictions to the area that it has been proposed. There have been a number of issues to the prior to the proposed parking changes with long-term parking of camper vans. Therefore, the changes to the parking will almost certainly just increase the number of vehicles on nearby roads. So I think you get the overall picture is, although residents, I think, overall support it, there are some reservations around the possible impact, which is noted in the papers. But I have to conclude with this, that overall, unlike many similar schemes on parking restrictions, this one actually does have majority support in the consultation, and especially if we are looking at prioritizing the views of residents actually living in the area which will be impacted. There are 22 objections and 47 responses in support. So we can actually say that this scheme does have majority support in the consultation. So on balance, having spoken to many residents and looking at the documents today and the consultation responses, I hope councillors can support the proposal today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your many points. Very good. So now we don't have Councillor Howard or Councillor Tong here, but we have Councillor Bennett. So Councillor Bennett, you are a member of this committee, so you can speak as long as you want.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think I need to speak for very long. All 4 ward councillors have consulted extensively over the last 2 years over this. We agree with the points made by Councillor Boulat and also the comments made by the 2 public speakers. You'll note that in the comments that there's some very different views expressed by residents. And I just wanted to pick up 2 very small discrepancies that might be worrying committee members. One is a statement there have been no complaints about the campers. We think that what this means is there's been no formal complaints made using the website complaint form, but I can certainly attest that all 4 ward councillors and Councillor Copley before us receive regular complaints about antisocial behaviour, and the same particular types mentioned by the first public speaker, including public toileting, disposal of toilet contents in green bins, public toileting in the children's area, which is obviously very distressing since that's a heavily used children's. And the other issue, discrepancy I wanted to raise was about safety. At sometimes the area is practically deserted. If I'm coming back late from a council meeting, I will quite often be the only person I see. At other areas, it is incredibly busy, and you don't have to be at the pinch points more than 5 to 10 minutes to notice a near miss or even, unfortunately, sometimes an accident. And both Councillor and Boulat and I can attest to that. So I think that explains very different responses from residents, some saying they've never had a problem and others saying they've had a lot. Okay, finally, is that this isn't a perfect scheme. We would very much like the yellow lines to go down further so that there isn't a displacement on Riverside. But if the choice is between no scheme and the scheme as it stands at present, we support the scheme as it stands. Residents have been waiting for a resolution for this for longer than I've lived in Abbey, and I've been a resident since 2000. Now that we've actually got a decision, I think we need to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bennett. So my understanding from a discussion at the last meeting about residents, this is basically residents parking in a way, is that this scheme is that, and the officers might correct me if I'm wrong, is that we could recommend to make minor changes today, but this is but I mean really minor, and the definition of minor, the officers can explain what we could ask for or not, and otherwise we're looking at what is on the table. So, but first of all, we've got a few more hands. So we've got Councillor Robertson, Councillor Bajan, and then Councillor Slatter.
Do you want me to speak then? Okay, I went and had a look on my way here today because I felt I needed to remind myself of the situation at the site. I think the officers should explain to us why they have selected single yellow lines for a certain section and no yellow lines at all for other sections, because as has been said, plans will just move down the road. Can we have some clarification of why that decision was made?
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. Can you hold that question and we'll see what the other two councillors say. Councillor Bajan.
Chair, could you just clarify for me, the decision made here, will they actually implement this, or does it have to go to another committee before it's approved?
We make recommendations to the county council who make the final decision. Councillor Slatter.
Yes, obviously this has been many years in the making, and I certainly acknowledge Councillor Boulat's point about it might be something we can adjust the LHI process. I see it's on the agenda coming up. The officers will be reporting on it. If there is a possibility to tweak it quicker than starting it all over again. But I leave that just hanging, unless Councillor Beckett is wanting to respond. It would seem from reading and listening to residents that displacement parking is an issue, but that's nothing new. I am very concerned at the possibility of the displacement of antisocial behaviour, because clearly that does need addressing in a different way, and it's really useful to have your, unfortunately, personal experience of it, both of you, but obviously Councillor Bennett as well has passed it on second-hand. I would hope that we can do something in terms of community safety and people feeling safer in their area or visiting an area. That is different from displacement parking. So rather like Councillor Bennett, I think it's not perfect, but but to go ahead with this is how I'm thinking at the moment. But I'm listening for anybody else who's going to talk.
Councillor Beckett.
Thank you, Chair. I'll make some more comments later on, but I just want to clarify for Councillor Bajent the scheme of delegation and how this works. So our recommendation here is then given to the Exec Director of Place and Sustainability, himself and the local member, so Councillor Boulat, who would make the decision unless it was called into committee. So by default, it would be the local member in consultation with the Exec Director. From this, it wouldn't naturally go to another committee after this one.
But the Executive Director is at the County Council, Cambridgeshire County. Okay, so now if we go back to the officer to pick up the points.
Thank you. So I think, as has been explained, it's a compromise. I think the scheme, and it was trying to find something that would work for the majority. Whilst never pleasing absolutely everyone, it's trying to find something move forward. So understand that the scheme as it sets out allows some residents parking. If it was extended a lot further, it would reduce parking further and potentially increase the displacement. That was the thinking behind the design.
Councillor Robertson.
Could you clarify who will park on the single yellow line after 7 p.m? Who are you expecting to use it? And wasn't there an option to introduce a residence parking zone, the area of Stanley Road and Riverside?
I would think after 7 p.m. residents might park at those spaces with the single yellow. Regarding residents overnight parking would be that. And regarding a residents parking scheme, I remember it was discussed many years ago and didn't progress at that time. I don't know if
Well,
Nicola's
I'll
got
comment
anything.
that I can see there's a need for a scheme, but I think it's inadequate. But I suppose it should probably better go ahead and we'll see what happens.
So just going back on the second speaker raised the issue about the antisocial behaviour in the children's playground. So that's not, that's a really awful thing to hear about. And Councillor Satter raised community safety, which is a general issue. I think those are issues that this committee can't make a decision on, or, you know, but I think as we've listened to it here, what I would suggest is that I write on behalf of this committee about those two relevant city council officer who deals with the playground, and also to highlight the community safety issues raised, to make sure that the points raised here goes on to, they're not sort of just set aside. Councillor Bennett.
I just wanted to say that Councillor Boulat and I were out today at lunchtime with the community safety problem solving officer and the community safety sergeant in this area of Riverside. And we've had a wide-ranging discussion about this already today. And the problems are unfortunately well known. We are working towards a solution on this. I don't think we're going to get there very quickly.
But it's really good to hear that you're taking that action, but I just think that as it was raised at this committee, it would be only right that this committee passes those points on just as a point of a small action to take. So now we have Councillor Bajan and Councillor Smart, please.
Thank you, Chair. Could somebody explain why it was such a small scheme and not more expensive, or in line with what Councillor Robertson said? Because whilst it's going to be beneficial, it does seem that it will just move the problem up the road. Could one of the officers explain why it was so small?
We'll just see what Councillor Smart wants to raise first. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so it seems like a pretty good scheme, better than nothing for sure. So just two questions. I'm no expert on highways, but firstly, was putting those little lines on at right angles to the double yellows considered, so no waiting as well as no stopping, I believe. So were they considered? And the other thing is, it's got a wide bit of road where the double yellows are going. So is it possible, would it be possible to park in the middle of the road if you had a mobile vehicle, you know, like a camper van or something? And would that not get you a ticket because you're in the middle of the road as opposed to on the double yellow lines? I know it sounds like a strange question, but I mean, I walk down there a lot and it seems to me you could just plonk it in the middle, and does that mean you get away with it?
Officer, could you come back to that?
Okay, I have got two technical officers on the call. If we need, I'll try and answer. I think the first question, if you park in the middle of a road and you struck the road, then I think that would be a moving traffic offence that the police could, but also the double yellow lines would apply. Alex seems to know the answer.
The first question was about, did you consider putting those little lines at right angles to the double yellow lines, the ones that mean you can't stop as well as can't park? Okay, that was the first question. And the second question was, could vehicles park in the middle of the road? The road doesn't go anywhere. So if six vehicles parked in the middle, they're not, I mean, it might be illegal in road traffic terms, but you're not going to stop vehicles going anywhere. So I just wanted to check that the proposal here is going to actually work in practice. It's a stupid question, but I think it's useful to ask it.
So, and there's also Councillor Bajan's question about whether a wider scheme was considered.
I think I'll opt to phone a friend and bring in Eleanor on this one, please, who designed the scheme.
Hello, can you hear me, everybody? I would say that this is an LHI, so there's obviously a limitation to what we can put in this scheme. And I think that we were looking at this sort of specific issue with the camper vans and the unsociable behaviour as the priority. And with regards to end-on parking bays, I would say that the issue there is safety with vehicles manoeuvring. If you're backing in and out of a end-on parking bay, with cyclists and pedestrians obviously moving around you, then it's putting a bit of a dangerous situation sort of in as much as solving a parking issue. Does that help answer your questions at all?
There was a question about, there was several questions. One is about whether where you have double yellow lines, you'd considered putting these little marks across so that you'd prevent waiting as well as parking. And then there was...
Sorry, yes, curb line blips. Yes, double yellows, you are restricted regardless. So if you had double yellow lines in a large verge, for example, then the double yellow lines, they are enforceable right to the end of the highway boundary. The no waiting, they can be added. Curb blips, which literally is little yellow lines that go over the curb, which means no waiting. We do use those in various areas, but yes, they can be, and they would stop people just parking. I've just been advised, yes, we'd need to reconsult if we had, if we wanted to add curb blips.
At the moment, we haven't had Councillor Bajent's questions answered still, but do you want to come in quickly, Councillor Beckett, before?
I think I can probably offer some clarity here. So this scheme was applied for under the Local Highways Improvement Scheme, which is a scheme that we have at County Council to be able to do small highways improvement schemes. They have a maximum budget under the non-complex schemes of £10,000. So that's one of the reasons why a much larger scheme wasn't considered. I know Councillor Bullitt has been working on this one for a long time. I think it was a non-complex, wasn't it? Yeah. So that's why it comes under that one. In terms of the blipped curbs, from what I understand, there isn't an issue with people kind of waiting here. It's a parking issue. So therefore, they're not quite as appropriate as where in other places you would consider them, where pavement parking or people stopping is an issue. It's mainly to stop the overnight parking. The other one in terms of can people park in the middle, from my understanding, clarification here if anybody knows otherwise, but from my understanding of other things, the double yellow lines apply from the curb to the middle of the road. And so therefore, if you have ones on the other side of the road, it applies from the curb to the middle, so therefore the entire road is covered. So therefore you can't do that. That wouldn't be a thing. They would still be subject to getting a parking ticket. Hope that helps with some clarifications. I'll save my comments on the scheme for later.
That's very helpful. So we're going to have Councillor Boulay and Councillor Bennett.
Just one small point. One of the arguments against having specific bays, like when we're speaking to residents, or like to formalize the park in any way, that at the moment is not formalized parking. This is there are no specific bays or like lines for the parking. And this might present a challenge as well for like the GCP's future projects. So for example, some of the greenways will be converging on Riverside, part of the GCP's work. So we kind of wanted to avoid formalizing any parking that might be more difficult to create new cycle lanes or whatever the GCP is working on at the moment in terms of the greenways project, which of course is separate from this LHI scheme, but nevertheless important to consider in the wider picture.
Thank you. Councillor Bennett.
I just wanted to mention that ward councillors would prefer not to see a no waiting restriction, because there are disabled residents in this area who need to have taxi pickups, and there will be people delivering groceries, and we would like those to be able to continue so that residents can enjoy independent living for as long as possible. I also wanted to confirm that we all agree with the comments made by Councillor Bullitt.
Thank you very much. We have Councillor Shayler and Councillor Bird.
I was going to make 2 points, but one of them has already been covered by Councillor Bullitt on the greenways. The other one is a bit of a peripheral one, but some of the mobile homes that are there are satisfying a housing need. There are people who work in the NHS and whatever. And I wonder what kind of attempts to engage with them or think about alternative sites for these people.
Councillor Bird.
Thank you. And I have to agree with Councillor Shayler on there about where these people are going to go, because there's nurses in them vans and firemen, ambulance drivers. They can't afford a home. They're on the waiting list. As you know, there's 3,000 people on the Cambridge City Council waiting list, so they're not going to get a home. So we need to look at that. And the other thing was the disabled parking. I know people who are disabled that stop there around that area and then go on to Sturbridge Common. If we're going to push any parking further down the road, a lot of disabled people are not going to be able to get onto Sherburne, onto the common anymore. Be too far for them to walk.
I don't know whether, I thought that with people with blue badges they had the right to park in areas where cars are restricted.
Yeah, they can, but if there's no waiting on there, that can cause a problem.
Okay, so that's another argument just to have the double yellow line. So I think we'd like to so a couple of points. One, Councillor Bullock asked about monitoring and tracking the issues. So if this is a limited funded scheme, LHI, if this committee made a recommendation about 6 months monitoring and the ability to track the issues in the first 6 months, is that going to be problematic because of the limited funding? I mean, are we able to, I would like to support that as a suggestion. And the issue about people that living in vans is that is again something that it's been, now you've brought it up at this committee, we're not able to deal with that at this committee, but I think it's important that the points raised are passed on to people who deal with people who live in these different forms of homes. Councillor Beckett.
Thank you very much. I'll comment out my comments if that's okay. So firstly, I want to thank the members of the public that came along to raise the issues. I think it really is important that we hear people's views, so thank you for coming and raising your issues. I know this has been a difficult one. I know how much work all of the councillors locally have been putting in to solve this, and it's not an easy problem to solve. There's a real range of complex issues going on here, not least the housing and why people are coming here. I know Councillor Bird is obviously our Exec Director of Housing at the City Council, so hopefully she can bring something to bear to be able to help those people, because clearly living in camper vans at the side of the road is not an answer that anybody should be doing. And we should be doing everything we can to help those people who are essentially, well, homeless, for want of a better word. And the housing crisis in Cambridge is obviously a really, really big issue. I do think, though, that this is probably the best solution we can come to within the realms of the money that we have available within the local highways improvement. The local highways improvement scheme is always horrifically oversubscribed within Cambridge City. There are so many good schemes that we see come forwards, and it is always disappointing that there's not enough funding to be able to implement everything and to be able to go as far as we would like in all of these. It is one of those things that I hope with the new government we might see some more transport funding, because there are so many of these things that really do require attention. In terms of monitoring, I think we would have to be slightly careful of that one and setting a precedent, because there are so many of these that need monitoring going forwards. I really hope that our local councillors in the area, though, will continue to raise the issues as they come forwards. I'm not convinced formal monitoring would be required, but I think the local members, it's very apparent when it becomes an issue, and I do worry about the follow-on parking and things being displaced. There is no doubt in my mind that the people that are parking here will probably move somewhere else. We can only hope that they move to somewhere that is more appropriate. I know this spot is somewhere that is listed online, and therefore that's one of the reasons why we have so many people coming there. It is a big issue, though, where these people should go and what should happen to them in the future. And I hope Councillor Bird and others can pick up some of that housing-related issues. But just to clarify, I do support this, even though, as always, I don't believe it's a perfect solution. But thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Slater.
Yes, I think this discussion has been an excellent illustration of how useful it is to talk locally, and hopefully reassuring to the public here in person, and maybe some even watching on a line, that we are aware of things that need to be looked at in other places by other people, but that's not the same as passing the buck at all. I mean, you've spoken about Community Safety Partnership. I'm the Community Safety Champion at the county. I will be at the next Community Safety Partnership meeting, and if it isn't on the agenda, I shall make sure somebody hears about it one way or another, because we do need to make sure these things do get tracked one way or another, and shared with the people who can take them forward as much as possible. So that was more a comment generally on how this committee can fit into local government, because as you know, as you realise, there's city councillors here and county councillors, but we are all listening and talking to one another. Thank you.
Okay, so just Councillor Bennett, and then I'll sum up. Thank you.
Sorry, very quick point, but I just wanted to mention that we have another local highways round coming up in late November, and if appropriate, Councillor Boulat, Councillor Howard, Councillor Tong and Councillor Me would be very keen to consider an extension of parking restrictions in the area as one of the 5 schemes we put forward. So there is still hope.
Councillor Bajan.
Chair, would it not be more appropriate? I mean, I'm not arguing against your point, but would it not be more appropriate for this to be looked at in a more extensive way? I mean, because they could use all 5 of their LHI schemes, I suppose, and spend 50,000 on yellow lines. Would this not be something that should be looked at by officers and councillors to be a more extensive answer? Because moving these vans further up Riverside, for example, doesn't work, does it? It's not the right thing to be doing. We're just putting in a stopgap measure, which I support completely. But it's something that needs a bit more consideration. Thank you.
So I'd like to sum up. I would like to suggest that, well, the recommendation is that we were going to vote to recommend that the Executive Director of Place and Sustainability, in consultation with the local member, approve the installation of waiting restrictions as advertised. I'd also like to make the point that this committee feels that monitoring the situation after the implementation is important, but that we leave it to the county officers and the members to decide the best way forward to do that. Is that okay with everybody? Oh, okay, let's have a show of hands for those who agree with the recommendation. That's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, we'll go on to item 5. The next report is an update on pavement parking, red routes and resident parking schemes delivery plan. And it will be presented by the County Council's Parking Policy Manager, Nicola Gardner, and the Greater Cambridge Partnerships Director of City Access, Lynn Miles.
Hi, can everyone hear me okay? I'm hoping yes. Please interject if not. Thank you, Chair. This is just a short paper, in fact, on various elements of parking policy across Cambridge at the moment, simply to update you on where they are at the current time. This committee at its first meeting in June had requested a little bit of clarity on various parking issues in terms of who was doing what and where responsibility lay, and this paper aims to provide that update, as well as a chance for members of this committee to give feedback or steers or thoughts on the elements that are currently in train. So it summarises the state of play on 4 key elements. The first is resident parking schemes, and this committee heard the case for the first one at its last meeting, and others will follow. The second element of the paper is just to update on pavement parking. where the county's Highways and Transport Committee has asked the Greater Cambridge Partnership to consider funding some sort of pilot scheme through the integrated parking strategy. And so work is underway on that. The next item it updates on is the integrated parking strategy itself, which is being developed for Greater Cambridge. So that's the City of Cambridge plus the surrounding district of South Cambridgeshire. And that aims to be an integrated strategy for on-street, off-street parking to sort of try and tie it together into a coherent overall strategy, picking up all elements of parking. The vision and objectives for that strategy was agreed by the GCP board in June 2022. And shortly after that, the work to develop the strategy was paused whilst the Making Connections proposals were developed and taken forward, simply because the outcome of that decision would have made quite a big difference as to what the right parking strategy was. So now there's been a decision not to go ahead with the Making Connections proposals. The integrated parking strategy has been picked back up and is being developed. And amongst other things, it will think about things like, beyond the current round of resident parking schemes that is in train, what is the next tranche of priority schemes? So some of the conversation in the last item I've been listening to with interest, and that sort of will note those issues for consideration through the parking strategy. And then the fourth item is merely a sort of brief reminder that the county parking policy team is in the middle of a review of the resident parking scheme policy framework, and that's the sort of headline framework policy which underpins the development of all resident parking. That review is underway by the county team, and there'll be a further update at the December meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Lynn. So this paper is now for us to just note and comment on. It covers quite a lot of things. Short report, but very interesting. So I'd like to just open it up to members for your comments. So we'll have Councillor Slatter and then Councillor Bennett.
Thank you very much in two directions for the report. It's got some useful stuff that we can share with public and other councillors in terms of explaining what's possible and what isn't. A quick negative, if you don't mind, 2.11, I think you must mean 2024, September 24, because the timelines is something I'm going to talk about in a minute. So 2.11, is the consultation opening this September?
Yes, I'm sorry about that.
That is a typo. That's good.
Yes, the consultation on the Wilberforce Road area scheme actually opens at the end of this month. Yeah, 24.
Fine, yes.
Sorry.
I was just wanting to notice and draw attention to the fact that the one we need to be making sure the public know about in good time is West Romsey. Because it's very common, we know that people get taken by surprise by consultation and sometimes take it personally that they were taken by surprise. But this is one for councillors and others to make sure everybody knows that Romsey West is brewing, and the more when we can get drafts that can be going out, at least the scoping drafts, that would be very useful. Thank you. I think that was the main thing I wanted to say at this stage, Chair, so thank you.
So Bennett.
Just some very quick points. I think it's a good report and there's a lot in it I support. I particularly like the emphasis on the park and rides being more travel hubs rather than just basic park and rides. But I'd love to see more flesh put on the travel hub concept. Are we going to have click and collect for supermarkets, drop and pick off the parcels and dry cleaning, more extensive toilets, opening hours and a cafe, and maybe even a bicycle repair shop and a taxi rank? All of these things would promote use of a park and ride, and some of them would also help with one of the barriers to active travel, which is time poverty. I will admit that for many years the only car journey I took was inside Cambridge and less than 2 miles. And the reason I would travel that by car rather than walking and using public transport was I had a short interval before finishing my work today to get to my mum's nursing home before she started becoming too incapable of appreciating I was there because of her dementia, which would get worse during the evening. And so rather than take an hour and 15 minutes public transport journey, I would go 7 minutes in the car. And I think that might be an unusual example of time poverty, but it's a very typical one. And I know that Lynn has some very good ideas on trip chaining and tackling time poverty, because we've spoken about them during Making Connections, and I'd like to see more of that here. Thank you.
The travel hubs, the definition of travel hubs and the opportunity about travel hubs was raised at the last GCP assembly, and the whole sort of specification of what the briefs, what the briefs might be like is something of interest to many, many members. Councillor Agent.
Chair, thank you. The residents in Romsey have been waiting, or the part of Romsey that's not part of the resident parking scheme, have been waiting for some time for this scheme to be tested with people that live there by ballot. We've been held up because there's been some difficulties about whether you can or cannot park on the pavement in the streets of Romsey, which we understand that if the pavement parking was taken away, it would be a loss of 500 car parking places, which is considerable and not something that can just willy-nilly be carried out. Can the officer give us an update on what the actual situation is right now in regards to this? Because it's time it was tested with the people of Romsey. It's gone on now for 2 years. Romsey is a car park for the city, a free car park for the city, and it's problematic. And given that we as a city council, I'm not quite certain about the county, I'm sure they have a similar view, are for trying to reduce the amount of cars using the city, coming in and out. Romsey provides a haven at this present moment for people who just come in and park. And we need to test to see if the residents would like to see a resident parking scheme.
Councillor Bajan, I think you've asked two things. One about testing the residents' parking scheme in Romsey, and the second one is a very specific question about whether parking on pavements is acceptable within a residents' parking scheme.
Yeah, and the third one point really was, what is the current position on this on the resident parking scheme being designed for Romsey? Because I've seen a couple, and we're still...
Okay, I'm sure the officer will answer on that. I'm going to have Richard Robertson and then Councillor Young, and then we'll go back to the officer.
Yes, can I draw your attention to paragraph 2.14? I'd quite like to know, as I understood it, pavement parking and control of it can be delegated to the local authority, the county council. If that's true, if it was delegated and was fully taken up, would it then be possible for our enforcement people to issue tickets to cars parked on a pavement? I'm thinking particularly of Mill Road, where people park on the very crowded pavements of the north, on the south side, quite a lot. To drive through people to get to that position, it's highly dangerous, and it appears we can't ticket them. Sorry. It's an alarm. So that's the question: is how much of this delegation can we take up?
Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to say that I really welcome this. It seems to me that the County Council and Alex Beckett in particular is starting to look at this as a whole and sort of setting up a strategy and not doing things bit by bit without an overall review of what's really important. So I really, really welcome this, and I'd like to say that I really support the idea of restricting pavement parking for vehicles. It is a real problem in Queen Edith as well as Romsey. I'm sure it's a problem everywhere. It really, really shouldn't happen. It puts members of the public in danger, particularly those most vulnerable, those disabled, those women with young children. It's really not acceptable, and I really welcome steps to try and control it.
Thank you very much. So that was this, the pavement parking was raised in the very first meeting of this committee. So we'll go back to the officers, Lynn first, and then we'll come back to Councillor Beckett and then Councillor Share. So Lynn, I don't know, can you answer those points?
Yes, of course, no problem. Thank you, Chair. Thank you for Councillor Slatter's point out on the typo. So yes, and yes, Romsey is underway. We've been in discussion with the local members, and I'll come back to that. But yes, I thought it was helpful to set out the sort of broad timings so that people are aware that these things are coming up. Thank you, Councillor Bennett, for your comments. And yes, absolutely. Essentially, that thinking is central to the work of the integrated parking strategy. We have these park and rides, which are actually incredible assets that many other cities would really, kill to have. How can we make the most of them? How can we make sure they're full and well used? And that involves looking at all sorts of things like, currently free parking there is subsidised. Is that the best use of the money? Would there be other ways to use it? But it also considers things like what is the concept and how we can put some flesh on it. I think, there's a really good case for saying that they should be hubs in a sort of broader community sense, not just travel. So of course, the sort of calling point for buses, potentially something that makes rural buses more viable and more deliverable, because there is a sort of aggregator point for people, and you can put them on other buses so that the rural buses don't have to pick up and go all the way into the city. So there's clearly something there. All the things you mentioned, click and collect, dry cleaning, cafe. I'm particularly interested in whether you might be able to provide childcare on there. You will be aware that the big barrier to this is that most, if not all, of the park and ride sites are in Greenbelt, and that restricts what can be done on them. So we just need to think carefully about what are the uses that are appropriate within planning policy, and how do we start to think about delivering those. But that's absolutely what the integrated parking strategy will think of, because I suspect your example of time poverty is not actually an unusual example. I think it's probably a very typical one, and that's exactly why that trip chaining is a really important thing to take. Sorry, for those that are listening, trip chaining is a really jargony term that transport planners use. It simply means these people, disproportionately often women, who are trying to do multiple things in one journey. And the sort of classic example is doing childcare drop off on the way to work, and then coming back and picking the child up, and then going to the supermarket on the way home. That sort of chaining of multiple ideas, and that's traditionally has been harder to service through public transport. And thank you, Councillor Thornborough, for pointing out the link to the Joint Assembly, which also picked this up when it was talking about Newmarket Road Park and Ride. So please rest assured that those comments have been heard and will feed in. Councillor Bajan, I know we've discussed a few times the challenges of bringing forward a scheme for West Romsey, given the loss of parking spaces. I think we need to sort of keep talking about this. The situation as it stands is that you're required to leave a certain amount of carriageway width in between bays to allow free and safe movement of emergency vehicles, amongst other things, unless for some reason the emergency services tell you can do otherwise. And you're required to have a certain amount of pavement space to allow safe and free passage of particularly wheelchairs, people in buggies and so on. And on most of the roads in the zone, it is difficult to square that with double-sided parking. So where we are at the moment is just checking and rechecking where and what can be accommodated that is compliant with the policy. And I don't think there was a question from Councillor Young, but sort of noted your support on restricting pavement parking for vehicles. Councillor Robertson, I think in principle it is possible to delegate pavement parking from county officers to city officers. The challenge really with pavement parking is that where there are yellow lines, it can only be enforced with a waiting restriction. So there's a grace period before you can ticket, when the reason people park on the pavement is often sort of dart out, grab something from the shop and dart back. So that's a challenge. And then the other challenge is that where there aren't yellow lines, it's enforceable by the police. So Sonia may wish to add something on that, but that's the broad situation. Is it's sort of not a lack of will to enforce, just that there are challenges around enforcement, which is the purpose of asking for the pilot to look at different ways in which we might do that, be it signs and lines, or be it things like bike parking racks on the pavement. You of course just have to be careful there that you're not causing a similar obstruction with bike racks as you would be causing with parked cars. So different solutions will be appropriate in different places. And the County Council Highways and Transport Committee has asked GCP to think about through the parking strategy, and so we will take that on through the parking strategy. I think that was all of the questions, but please let me know if you think I missed any.
So, Councillor Robertson, did you want to come back on the pavement parking point?
Yes, sir.
Or has your point been answered?
I think it's been largely covered, but I was talking about delegation from the police to the county, but it's already got it by the sound of it. I had misunderstood that, but they're not using it. That's the problem.
I think let's get some clarification.
So we can enforce in the CPE area, civil parking enforcement area, so Cambridge City, South Cambs, where there are restrictions. So if you've got a double yellow line and somebody parks half on the pavement, half off, we can enforce. If there's no restriction, then we can't enforce. The police technically could if you were obstructing the footway. However, they're limited resources. It's unlikely they would do that. So yes, we have already got the power where we have a restriction in place. One thing that may be of interest is the previous government did a consultation on pavement parking around 3 years ago and took no further action. However, there's potentially something that could happen with the new government. I think Sustrans have been writing to the government about this. So we wait and see if anything comes out on DFT, and I regularly ask if DFT if there's any clarification on this. So I will ask again when the new government sort of settled in and they're aware of what.
We have Councillor Beckett, Councillor Shaler, and then Councillor Bennett, and then Councillor Buller.
Thank you very much. Firstly, yes, parking is a challenge across our entire city, and I don't think anybody should think that we are not 100% committed to tackling this within the joint administration. Obviously, I brought a motion to full council looking at pavement parking, and I know Councillor Shaler is also similarly keen on making sure that we tackle things. Mill Road is a particular issue. I should say, actually, that to start with, there's two different issues we have with pavement parking. There is pavement parking where there are no other parking restrictions, so people just parking on the pavement. There's then the issue of people essentially using the pavement where there's double yellow lines to pull up somewhere, and we see that a lot on Mill Road, we see it a lot on East Road. We do take that incredibly seriously, and actually, as a team, the Highways team has been doing a lot of enforcement work on Mill Road recently, which over the last month has seen officers go out, I think on average about 25 times a day on Mill Road to try and enforce those areas where there are double yellow lines and people are parking on the pavement. I believe in that time there was something like 174 vehicles they observed parking illegally, and where possible they have given tickets to people for that. So please do realise that we are taking this seriously, and I hope those members of the public at home realise just how seriously we are taking it, even though it is a really difficult issue. Now, one of the issues with Mill Road and some other places where there are double yellow lines, you obviously are still allowed to stop to pick up and drop down and load and unload. We do have some restrictions in some areas. We have some urban clearways and we have some waiting restrictions that stop that, but a lot of the places you can do that still. So actually, out of those 174 vehicles that were stopped on Mill Road, as far as I understand it, only 37 we were actually able to issue parking tickets to, which is deeply frustrating that there's that many people kind of parking on our pavements and everything else, and we legally can't issue them a ticket because they drive off beforehand. So there are different things that we can do to address that, both on Mill Road and around the city. On our strategic routes, I'm very keen on us investigating red routes. So for the benefit of others, red routes are no stopping routes that can be enforced via a camera. So all you need to do is see somebody stopping and you can enforce it and give them a ticket for being able to do that. So I think there are some places in the city where that would be really, really useful to be able to do that. I know myself, I bike my child to school every day, and the number of times that our cycle lane is blocked by a driver parking over a double yellow line in a cycle lane, which means that a 6-year-old has to veer out into the road, is dreadful and completely unsafe. So we do need to be doing our work to be able to tackle that one. Parking in the city is a big issue in general. I mean, I don't think any of us should hide away from the fact that we have the Grand Arcade, which causes its own issues, with people driving around Bennett Street and the issues that causes. But I know obviously that's a big income for the City Council, and maybe that's something that we do need to discuss in a kind of, city-county basis as to what we do with parking and where people are going. So I hope that's something that we can move to discussing at some point as we go forwards. There is also obviously some places where it isn't appropriate to double yellow line, it isn't appropriate to red route, but we can come up with other smarter ways of doing it, be that, bollards, bike racks, everything else. So there's a number of different ways that we should be looking at. I have droned on way too much for now, so I'm going to bring myself to a close. So it's something we all take really, really seriously. It's really great to have this paper here today, but please, everybody watching home as well, I know there's often a thought that we're not doing anything about it. There are a lot of people working behind the scenes very hard to tackle these issues, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Shaler.
Thank you very much, Chair. I first of all want to draw the distinction between pavement parking and marked bays. Even in London, where there are much stricter rules about pavement parking, there are marked bays that do come onto the pavement. And in Cambridge and even in Romsey, where we already have residents parking, there are streets where there is parking on both sides. Both sides are in bays that are marked up onto the pavement, and they are compliant across Romsey now. We are not about to start taking pavement parking away in that sense, even if we don't have residents parking now because it's not compliant. They are compliant. And so this discussion is really about residents parking in those areas that have distinct parking places. That's different to the kind of blocking and near obstruction that we see in areas where there are double yellow lines and that sort of thing. And I sit on the patrol meeting in Westminster, which is the parking and transport regulations outside of London, and they were very keen to get those powers that London has to places outside of London. The previous government sat on it. So we are in high hopes that we will have some of those regulations at our fingertips. So just to, again, reiterate, this is not about the marked bays. This is about that irregular parking that we all have trouble with.
Thank you very much. Councillor Baden.
Thank you, Chair. I think we raised this at the first meeting. I think the question of parking on Mill Road in particular has been a running sore for a long time. I appreciate that people are telling us that a lot is being done. Tonight I will cycle home about 10 o'clock. I will go down Mill Road and a third of the pavement down there will be covered in cars. They're not there for popping into a shop. They're there because they're using a restaurant or actually just parked there. I do not understand why this is not being enforced. The cost of a traffic enforcement officer compared with the amount of money that would come in from just following me down Mill Road tonight at 10 o'clock is, there's no argument. I cannot understand. I'm just hearing people talking about what they want to do, not what they are doing. And I find it very, very difficult. I know there's been a massive campaign in Romsey and Petersfield about the actual pavement parking. Not so much about, but also including about people popping into shops. But that is currently allowed by the law. But people are parking permanently on the pavement for hour after hour. And I do not understand why that is not being enforced. So that's my first point. My second point is that the question of Romsey's parking scheme, or the West Romsey as it's now being called, can we please have a date when the scheme will be tested, please? Because I've seen 2 sets of plans. There's been a difficulty about it. People talking, I can't remember the first set of plans I saw which were rejected, but I think it's 3 years now. Does it really take that long to organise a plan to sort out the parking? The residents of Romsey are quite angry and exercised about it. You can't walk down my road on the left-hand side of the pavement because of parked cars and bins. Now, both are problematic, and it's not just the parked cars. But the parked cars would stop me pushing a buggy down that road. So that is repeated on several roads in Romsey, and I would like a date from officers, if not today, but by the next meeting, as to when both of these things will be addressed. That's the Mill Road issue and resident parking in Romsey. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bajan. Councillor Beckett did say that there has been some enforcement of parking, pavement parking on Mill Road, but there were only limited circumstances where, when it was carried out, it could be. Anyway, your point was very well made, and we'll come back to the officers now about the Romsey date, and I think we also would like to know about the York Street residents' date for the next consultation as well. But let's go on to...
I appreciate what Councillor Beckett said about the 174 and the 47. I've written it down. But, sorry, 37, I misunderstood. But that has not solved the problem. I will go home tonight and the pavement will be covered in cars.
Councillor Bajan, these points were made in the first meeting, just as you said, and it is not satisfactory. I think we all feel the same way as you, and we would all like it resolved. So thank you for making the point again.
Thank you, Chair. People say a week is a long time in politics, and I remember very fondly the debate at County Council when Councillor Beckett proposed the motion on pavement parking, which I seconded in July 2022, so over 2 years now. And I have to say I haven't actually appreciated at that time. I thought it would be like a quicker fix, but since then I learned so much about like the issues around funding those trials and just the legal complications around enforcement in general. So I note in the paper it says there are currently not any county council funds available to trial this scheme to ban pavement parking to a specific area, but then the GCP will consider this, if agreed by GCP, it will be subject to an assessment, and then the detailed design will follow. So I was going to ask what the time frame is around that, whether we're speaking like months or like years from that in terms of this GCP-led process of agreeing the funding and then assessing this potential banning pavement parking to a specific area. I have to say I do sympathize with so many arguments around the room today, because from a councillor perspective, it's a very difficult one. Residents raise it all the time. We have specific issues in Abbey Ward around, match day parking, for example. All the city councillors, Councillor Bennett included, myself, we get all the time issues around obstructive parking. And it's very difficult to say, look, we can't really enforce it because it's not double yellow. You can report the police and probably they won't do anything about it because they are under-resourced. So I think it's a very kind of disappointing response we have to give as councillors. So I do welcome the update. I welcome that the GCP is going to look into this further. I would like to have maybe a comment around the time frame the GCP considers around this. But overall, I'm glad to see some progress happening on this one. Thank you.
Councillor Smart, and then we'll go back to Lynn.
Thanks, Chair. So, support the general gist of the report. I'd just like to ask the officer whether sort of physical barriers are being considered. So it says about red routes and Councillor Beckett said about that and resident parking. Councillor Beckett also mentioned bollards, and that's the thing I want to mention, bollards. So I've seen them used in other places quite effectively. For example, in La Rochelle in France, where they have bollards on many streets and stop parking by using them on the pavement. Now, the thing with bollards and things like that, because it's a physical barrier, it means there's no need effectively for enforcement. And that's a real positive, useful attribute, because enforcement can be the issue. It's one thing to get the sort of rules in place, it's another thing to enforce them. And so I'll just tell a brief story. We all know stories. A school in North Cambridge, parent dropping off child, drove onto the pavement to drop the child off, knocked over another child. These things happen all the time. And if there was a physical barrier on that bit of pavement, that wouldn't have happened, because the pavement is a space where we all expect to be safe. And, you know, Mill Road has been mentioned already, and that would be another potential place where, I mean, I don't know all the logistics of it, and it might not be appropriate, but physical barriers can be a way of helping with some situations in some places. So I just wondered if that is being considered by this report. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Smart. Can we go back to Lynn for some responses? Thanks.
Yes, of course, Chair, thank you. I'll try and take them broadly in order, but group them where there are themes. To Councillor Beckett, really, sort of, yes, those issues of sort of income and the fact that different things will differently affect the income of both city and county are sort of part of the challenging issues that we've got to work through for the parking strategy. And I think whilst the request for GCP to consider pavement parking pilots and red routes covered both of those things, red routes in general are a relatively high cost and sort of more strategic scheme to implement. So I suspect that'll be a longer term thing, where pavement parking pilots might be a sort of shorter term consideration. There's a sort of continuum of sort of quick win, cheap things that can be funded quickly versus things that are a sort of a little bit more strategic and need to form part of the sort of integrated parking strategy work as it plays out, versus things that go beyond that into sort of headline transport strategy. But we are trying to work the same issues through all of those things so that we do the right things in the right order and the right place. Councillor Shaler is right to point out the distinction between the pavement parking pilot, which talks about sort of irregular parking on the pavement, versus the issue where in many places in the city there are marked parking bays on the pavement, and the question of the treatment of them in the Romsey scheme, where maintaining the existing parked bays would mean that the remaining pavement space is smaller than the policy currently suggests should be the case. They are complicated issues, and that's what we're working through. In terms of a date, it is essentially reliant on when we can design a scheme that local members are content to consult on, and so we'll carry on working with you to work through those issues. In terms of the York date that Katie asked about, that is the TRO for that is currently being drafted. We've got agreement from local members to proceed to advertise the TRO, and we hope that that will go out as soon as possible. Unfortunately, that team is absolutely overwhelmed with work at the moment, and so there is a little backlog to clear, but as soon as that can be drafted, it will be advertised and brought back to this committee to discuss any objections received. Councillor Boulat asked a question on funding and timescales for the pavement parking pilot. There are a number of ways it could be funded. The county doesn't have any existing funding to bring it forward, and the GCP doesn't currently have unallocated funding to bring forwards. But there is a question of whether and how you might reprioritise within certain existing budgets. Or there's a question of the sort of traditional ways that strategies can be funded, so through developer contributions and various other things. So that's essentially what we will be looking at through the parking strategies. How can we develop these? The parking strategy will ultimately feed into the Greater Cambridge Transport Strategy, and so the sort of timescale for that is probably looking at towards the end of next year. But there will be an update to the combined authority on timescales of the Greater Cambridge Transport Strategy in autumn of this year. And then finally to Councillor Smart, yes, so physical barriers such as bollards are part of a potential solution on pavement parking. And as I was saying before, the key thing is just to make sure that when you're thinking about physical barriers, you're not sort of recreating the problem of stuff on the pavement getting in the way. So we just need to, there'll be places where that's appropriate and there is space to put bollards. There'll be places where actually that restricts the space on the pavement too much and it doesn't really solve the problem. And so it will depend on the location. But yes, that's one bit of the potential toolbox.
Thank you, Lynn. I think the expressions of the members here regarding the dates of when things might come forth, it implies that we really hope that these resident schemes can come through as quickly as possible, but we understand the pressure that you're under. Thank you. But we're going to have back to Councillor Bajan.
Chair, can I just focus on one point? I've focused on several, but can I talk about the barriers that could be experimented with on Mill Road? Would any legislation need to be approved? Would there need to be any consultation about putting some cycle racks on the side of Mill Road in some of the peak places where people actually park right on the pavement to prevent that? Is there anything that's stopping us from doing that? Because if it's only a question of cash, I'm sure that some money can be found to put some cycle racks on the side of Mill Road pavement, where it's wide enough to accommodate them and would work to prevent the cars parking there. Thank you.
Before we go back to Lynn, would Councillor Bird or Councillor Ms Jeannie want to say anything? Because I want to make sure you have the opportunity if you want.
Thank you. I am listening very carefully. I mean, this is very much a useful forum for people that don't usually sit on these committees to actually say what they want, which is great. I think on parking we have the problem that we were always going to have. Lynn has been described as our director for city access. The problem with city access is that we've got more cars in the city than we can accommodate. And that does result in things at the moment being run counter to guidelines and the tension between wanting to do a scheme that's compliant with guidelines and that resulting in the loss of places where people usually park. In terms of, it's become, and then again, I kind of want to switch hats very, very briefly. I do chair the GCP board, so I will be part of that group of people that will look at reallocating funds if indeed that proposal ever comes forward. We are not the sort of, or the county doesn't have any money, let's go there instead. I mean, we're kind of the time for that argument of run has ended. So any reprioritization of funds that should look into a bit more of a sort of active travel enabling and pavement clearing measures will have to be a collaborative effort, because I think there is quite a lot of potential for that. Which brings you back to things like S106 contributions, greenways and all of these things, which we do hope that this incoming government will be wanting to make planning legislation more favourable towards those things. We have a list of things that they could do to help us, and we hope that they will do them.
Thank you very much. Now, we'll have Councillor Bird, and then we've got Councillor Slatter would like to come back, Councillor Shaler. Yeah, Councillor Bird first.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, pavement parking's always been a thing we've all shouted about for years and years, so it's nice to know that something's being done. But that's not the only thing on the pavements. It's getting more risky now to go out at the pavements, just to go to the shops, because you've got all these e-bikes and that, using pavements. We had one out here today, and that zoomed past us. I'm sure it was doing 30 miles an hour. And you know how many people are out here. I'd like the GCP, if possible, to look into this and see what can be done. I know a lot of these scooters are private ones, which are illegal anyway, but is there something we can do to stop them riding on the pavements. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll have Councillor Slatter and then Councillor.
Well, it's a bit of a cheeky question while we've got Lynn Miles on tap. I've been annoyed for years by the amount of money we have to spend advertising TROs in newspapers that hardly anybody reads. Is there any chance of bending the ear of somebody higher up, just to see how much discontent there is generally, and whether there are, of course, more relevant ways of advertising that don't cost us so much money and don't erode our LHIs as much as they do now? Or is it just me?
Councillor Shaler.
Yeah, I think we can answer the legal bits about TROs and how they are done and how antiquated it is. But, the aspect of putting cycle racks on Mill Road has been extensively explored and reported on. The problem, of course, is the amount of the pavement along Mill Road that is in the highway's ownership as opposed to the area. And I understand that they can't find somewhere that would satisfy what Councillor Bager is talking about. However, bollards that don't take so much space are currently being looked at.
We'll go back to Lynn, but it sounds like that if there is going to be a pilot about dealing with pavement parking, it could look at lots of issues, generally not specifically for one road or another in Cambridge. Do you want to say anything, Councillor Beckett, before I go back to Lynn?
Go on then. So I think Councillor Shaler is right. I mean, I know Councillor Bagent is annoyed about the enforcement on Mill Road, and I totally understand that, but having visited 766 times in a month and still not solving the problem, when I think it's about 1 in 20 of those visits actually results in finding somebody, we clearly need to look at other solutions to be able to do it effectively. Now, as I'm sure everyone will be aware, there is a committee meeting discussing the matter of Mill Road Bridge, and while none of us know what will happen with that decision, depending on what happens, I'm sure we can look at a range of different solutions to be able to do things that might help the situation. It's really good to hear Councillor Shaler talking about bollards, but I personally believe that we need to look at some real public realm improvements on Mill Road.
I think we should
But
try
I was
and
about
not
to say,
be so specific. And I must say that I think many of us are very annoyed about the pavement parking on Mill Road, not just Councillor Bajan.
and I was about to say to you, there, Councillor Thornbury, that I don't think we should focus just on Mill Road. There are so many issues around the city. I personally represent Cherry Hinton Road, that also has a lot of issues on it. East Road, I see every day, has a lot of issues. There are many, many roads in Cambridge. It's not even just pavement parking, it's verge parking. And we see so many areas where we've had the verges pulled up. In Queen Edith's ward, I was successful in an LHI recently to put some fences in to stop verge parking. We just need to try and address all of these different issues. It is deeply problematic. And finally, on the issue of Councillor Slatter of how much we cost to by advertising newspapers, that is deeply frustrating that a large amount of the cost of some of our schemes is simply advertising a newspaper. And I hope some people here might have the ear of our new government, and maybe that might be something they could look into. But I know obviously there's some quite strong lobbies when it comes to that one. But it is something, reducing the cost of being able to implement things is something I'm deeply passionate about, because we have such limited funds and we all wanted to go further. So if we could do something about that one, it would be brilliant. Thank you.
So I'm very keen to wrap this up soon, but Dave, Councillor Bajan, if you want to make a new point before we go to
Yes, Chair. I make this point because this is a new committee and we've got enthusiastic people here and we're not time served on this. So I would like to suggest that we have a site meeting on Mill Road where we look at the possibility of putting cycle racks parallel to the road, not at right angles to the road, to use as a joint function every certain period of space, and it will stop cars mounting the pavement. Could we just have a site meeting to walk down Mill Road and look for the possibilities? Could the GCP come? Could county council officers and city council if they want to, and members of this committee or local councillors come? We can walk down there and have a look. Because Mill Road for people, Mill Road for people put a barrier on Mill Road.
Agent, if the TRO goes through, there will be extensive discussions about Mill Road and the public realm, all the points you've raised, and I think it will, if we hold on a month, we'll know what's happening there. But
Not a foregone
and I'd like to
conclusion.
go back to Lynn, and she may want to raise the point that you've made. Thank you. Lynn, please.
Thank you, Chair. Let me go back a little bit onto this. So the active travel team is currently looking at the question of smaller obstructions on the road to stop pavement parking without obstructing the pavement, and we can bring an update on that to a future meeting. I'm happy to take an action there in terms of bollards or cycle hoops or whatever. In terms of Councillor Bird's question on e-bikes on pavements, the riding of bikes on pavements is unfortunately a sort of police matter for enforcement, and the challenge comes back to the sort of their prioritisation and their resourcing to do that. In terms of you're quite right that quite often it's the privately owned bikes and scooters that are more problematic because they are not speed limited, whereas the boy scooters that are part of the formal government trial, both scooters and bikes are speed limited there. There is an outstanding action with central government to legislate on scooters and e-bikes and how they're used and whether they go on the road or the pavement or so forth, and that hasn't happened. There's quite a lot of interest from the sector and the government enforcement, legislating on them properly to bring them sort of into a realm in which they can be enforced. But I'm afraid there's nothing that we can directly do on that. I'm quite flattered by Councillor Slatter's idea that I might have the ear of someone higher up. I'm not sure if she means God or the government, but in either way, in terms of bending their ear on advertising in newspapers, I agree it's very expensive, and I agree with Councillor Beckett's comments that it might not be the best use of public funds. Not least because when we do advertise TRO, we do always write to those directly affected anyway and make sure they're aware. And there are cheaper and more effective ways of getting to people, I think, but at the moment that is what we're required to do. We will continue to press that case when we get a chance with government. And I think that has covered most of the questions.
Just briefly, Chair, are we saying no to a site meeting to look where we might put these barriers?
Councillor Bajan, I think that there will be extensive site visits to Mill Road, probably in the very soon future, the near future. And if the TRO goes a different way, we can specifically look at a site visit, but not at this. We're not going to agree it now. We need to see what happens in the next few weeks. I think now I'd like to thank Lynn for all of your questions coming back on this paper, and to the officers who've been involved in writing it. Thank you very much. We still have another item that you might want to comment on. So it is item 6, which is the Cambridge Joint Area Committee Agenda Plan. So this is the final item of this committee. So I don't know if there are any updates to the plan from officers or comments from members. I don't know whether there's any updates from officers. So we have Councillor Robertson and then Councillor Beckett.
There is no place on the planned agenda for the York zone. It should be on there for December, I would hope. Certainly should be on there somewhere.
Councillor Beckett.
Thank you very much. I'd really like us to add, if possible, a paper on the King's Parade barrier. I know this was something that was passed by the County Council. I think it was even before I chaired the committee, so it must be nearly 4 years ago now. And there were... No, it was actually on in our committee as well. We renewed it in Highways and Transport. But at that point, we were promised that the city was going to redesign it and there was going to be a bunch of other things going on. I think it's one of those areas where we need to work together between city and county. So I think it would be really useful if we could get some update on that one, so as we can figure out how as city and county we can work together. Because I know that barrier is, how should we say, suboptimal, and it'd be really good if we could get something better for all of us. Thank you.
So, I don't know, Sonia, will you be answering? So we would very much like to make a provision for the York Street residents parking scheme to come through in December. And I think this suggestion about the King's Parade barrier update as a report is a good suggestion. Can we add that?
Okay, well, I don't think the York would be ready to come in December because the TRO hasn't been processed yet. As I explained, it was on a waiting list. I think it's number 14. So it may be done by March, depends how long the process takes. The King's Parade barrier, my colleague from the City Council may like to comment on that.
Chair, I'm not in a position to have the detail, but I will discuss with colleagues about the way forward on that one. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson.
That barrier has been the saviour of King's Parade. It's a much better environment for everybody. I agree it needs redesigning though.
We're going to ask for an update either at the December meeting or the March meeting. Councillor Bajan.
Chair, it was brought in on the advice of the police, so the police should be involved in this debate as well.
So initially it will be an update rather than about where we are in the process, but and then that might lead on to a more extensive discussion about options, I think. I have Councillor Bennett and then Councillor Bird.
Chair, just a quickie, at some point we'd like to talk about barriers to active travel, and particularly time poverty and disability. Thank you.
Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Chair. Just to go on what Councillor Bajant's just said, we did have meetings with the police when we were talking about the barrier on King's Parade. So yeah, it'd be great to have an update on that.
So, Councillor Bennett, in our March meeting, we have an item which it was regarding walking, cycling, and active. Well, that's about the grants programme. Oh, we have a cycling and pedestrian scheme update at the next meeting, and there are issues about time poverty that you'd like to be brought into that. Yeah. And so I think what we're saying is the King's Parade, the barrier update will not come to the December meeting, but we'll hope to have it in the March meeting. Councillor Shayla.
I hate to go further down this rabbit hole, but if it has that kind of time into the future, I would like to add about the anti-terrorism police. We were in discussions, again, this is like 3 years ago, and we did discuss the threats to the Central Mosque at that time, and in light of the recent unrest across the country, I think we should revisit that as well. My own opinion is that the King's Parade is not the only or probably the most at-risk part of Cambridge.
So are you making a suggestion?
If we are going to engage with the anti-terrorism police, can we also discuss other areas of Cambridge that might need to be looked into?
I think to try and get an update as quickly as possible, I think just an update on the current situation and what has and hasn't been done and in the timetable, so that we can get that as quickly as possible. And then from that report, I think we can ask for more extensive consideration into things like safety. Councillor Beckett.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify, I think due to the sensitive nature of these barriers and, you know, the terrorism related, I wasn't asking for anything about the specific police advice. I was more looking at the design, and I know while some people like it, it also causes some serious accessibility issues for some people. So I wasn't really wanting to discuss the terror-related side of it. It was more the design of the barrier and how we can make it more permissive and break down some of those other issues. Well, Councillor Shaler makes a very good, valid point. I think it's possibly worth us doing that outside of a public meeting, potentially, because I understand the sensitivity of those.
We're just going to have an update that of information the officers want to provide, but it will be an opportunity for a more extensive debate and concerns raised, and what would be appropriate to take forward, we can consider then.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Slatter.
I think that's more a matter for the Community Safety Partnership to explore as well. Well, that's where the prevent stuff is coming through and the things from the Home Office. I'm very happy. Well, who's your community safety champion? Is it still Russ on the City Council?
Yes.
Yeah, well, as it, whoever you think is appropriate to actually pass it on. I'd happily do that. I don't want to step on his toes. Bigger than me.
So I think it's, let's see what the update says and see what's appropriate to go forward after that. So I think we've had comments from everybody who wants to make comments. So our next committee meeting is on the 18th of December, 2024. So I look forward to that, and I'd like to thank you all for participating tonight and for all the officers and their hard work. I hope you get home safely. Thank you very much.
Excellent.